Glad to present John Thomas with the work from University of Warwick, with the work developing resilience, a case study on the challenges involved in leading meaningful change in a highly academic secondary school. Okay.
Thank you.
It's yours. Let me slideshow.
So I thought I'd start off by giving you the context of the school. When it talks about a highly academic secondary school, it's actually a selective school in Kent. We hold it's not a record the head's very proud of, but we're the most oversubscribed school in the country pretty much every year because of the exam results that we end up getting at the end of it. For those of you who aren't familiar with the system in Kent, there's a Kent entrance test that every student has to take. It's a standardized test assessed in 3 different areas. So they have a maths, an English, and a reasoning test. The maximum standardized score is 140 in each of those, giving a maximum of 420 points per student. Over the course of the time that I've worked there, we've moved into what's generally known as a super selective status, which means that students are scoring incredibly high marks in the entrance test. That doesn't mean that they're all incredibly able students, that they are more able than the average. But also in Kent, there's been an explosion in the tutoring industry. So huge numbers of those children are tutored until they squeak. Okay, they start getting tutored after school and on weekends, basically from year 4 onwards, so that they can succeed in the test and they can get into schools like mine. It's not a particularly good system. It's an awful system because it's like any other test, they can be trained to pass it. So if you keep that in mind as we go through the data, when we talk about what's been going on, then hopefully that will give it a little bit more context. So this is what we're going to talk about. I will skip over bits of this because I'm awful for making too many slides when I put a presentation together. So there's bits that I'll go over very, very quickly and bits that I want to focus on. But really, this is where I'm going with the presentation. The theme really is about changing cultures. It's a school where I love to say to people that you could stick a sack of potatoes in front of most of the classes in the school and they would still do okay. Because generally speaking, we're fortunate, and I mean fortunate because I've also worked in non-selective schools, but we're fortunate to have students who are very highly motivated by the potential to get decent exam results. And so you tend to find that if you put a teacher who's not so good in front of them, they will still do okay at the end of the course because they'll do the work themselves. That's not the ideal. We want them to have a positive experience of their education. The bits I'm going to skip through will be the initial data and the pilot study and that type of thing, because I want to get to the end of it a little bit more in terms of where we are. So the journey so far, anyway, because I've taken a pause, I've had to pick it up again. The quote at the bottom is a chorus from one of my favourite songs, which hopefully you like. The wicked problem idea came from when I did my master's. It was in innovation and education. And so defining a wicked problem is part of recognizing that in social science, there's no easy answers. So there has to be some way of defining a problem so that you can come up with something useful. The changes in the GCSE curriculum affected us in the same way that it affected everybody else. And you'll see that in the data shortly. It was a department that was very much based in a traditional method of teaching. The teacher stands at the front, you deliver a lesson. The scheme of work was a list of textbook chapters. It was not a good situation when I arrived. And so part of my job was changing things straight away and trying to get more of a pattern to it and more of a sensible way of thinking about progression in maths. Embedding a vision in the department was massively important. Getting everybody singing off the same hymn sheet, as it were. Everybody has to have this idea of joint venture. We're only as good as the person teaching the class the year before. Okay, if they had a poor experience the year before, you can be the best teacher in the world, and that class is going to struggle, at least initially. So we have to have everybody on the same page. And that's something that I've managed to achieve to a large extent. CPD is really important, giving teachers agency over what they're learning and why they're learning it, setting it in the theory and making sure they understand why we're doing what we're doing was really important. Sharing the data was really important. But then it's not enough to do it once. We have to continually revisit the principles. Interestingly, but one of the things that occurred to me when Claire was speaking was something I find myself saying more and more these days. If you're finding it difficult, it's not you, it's the maths. And I say that all the time, particularly to the students who have less confidence, because they think it's them, and it's not them, it's hard. Okay, so it's a response that it's almost like a saying that I have. I have a number of them. Would you like the moon on a stick is another one, and you can't get blood out of a stone is the third one. I've also started introducing I'm not as green as I'm cabbage looking, but no one understands that one. The implementation is the thing, but then looking at how all of this work actually makes a difference to what the students are experiencing in the classroom day in, day out is a huge, huge issue. And this isn't something that it made sense to do over a year. It's literally taken me years to get to the point where I'm confident that we're starting to see the change. Okay, it's not a quick thing to achieve. It's basically around this, and again, it comes back to earlier on. It's about relationships, and if you empower teachers to actually feel like they can make a difference, then they feel they can make better relationships in the classroom. And if you're forming relationships in the classroom, then the students are more willing to go on the journey with you and to deal with the difficulties and the problems and the fact that it's not easy to do. But you have to develop that relationship. And this is a diagram that I put together for my master's dissertation, which really shows the cycle that I try and work to. It's all about empowering teachers to feel like they can make positive change by developing their expertise. Because you could have been teaching for 30 years, there's still things you can learn. I'm going to go fairly quickly here. The department vision, I used the words mastery, enjoyment and confidence. And I've actually had them printed and put on the wall down the corridor in the maths department. Not mastery in the traditional sense of maths mastery as being an approach to teaching maths, but that you understand it well enough, you can ask questions, you can deal with unfamiliar problems. You have a toolkit ready to use. Quality first teaching is something that the school introduced for the SEND department. So it's a cycle, a plan, do, assess, review cycle that we try and get into in everything that we do as a school across the school. Using the CPD time that we've got effectively was really, really important. But then building this understanding of affect in as well, because as maths teachers, the department were not very good at thinking about the emotional impact and how students felt about the subject. Because again, they're very good at hiding how they feel. It's a boys' school. Boys are awful for hiding how they actually feel about things. This is what I'm going to go through very quickly. This was a pre-pilot survey. So this was using the modified maths anxiety scale. It shows up that there are issues. The color coding is the thing, and you can see that red is corresponding to the red zone on the growth zone model. So you can see there are issues there with year 11, there's issues there with year 13. So those issues aren't just about the fact they're exam years, there are deeper things going on there. This I've written about before, so again, I'm going to go through it very quickly. This is an example of work from a student called Tom, who, when I started teaching him in the Easter of year 10, so the year before his GCSE exam, he was very happy to tell me that he was no good at maths. I'm getting a 3, sir, and I'll just mess about in your lesson because I'm not bothered. He was very upfront and honest about it. Tom ended up in a intervention class. He was taken out of games in the run-up to his exams, and ended up in an intervention class with me where I started talking about the growth zone model and other strategies that students can use. You can see some of the things that he's done there. So, for instance, labeling the question red, because he saw that question, it instantly put him in the red zone. But then you can see that he took the message on board, and you can see his working. You can see that he developed the ability to be able to break down his thinking into steps, and he managed to get 3 marks out of 5 on what was a tricky question for him. And it's tricky because it doesn't give you a lot of information. Okay, so Tom went for a grade 3 in year 10, and he got a grade 6 at the end of the course. So this is a young man who was very happy to tell me he was rubbish at maths. Okay. The big data was the real thing. So this was a survey that I passed out to the whole school. I got about 800 responses to it, so it was a big level of response. And you can see that as students move through the school, their level of anxiety increases. And again, it's color-coded according to the growth zone model. So red is severe anxiety. Scores of 32 to 50 generally accepted on the BET scale as being severe anxiety that you should be able to notice. However, boys being boys, what staff report is that they can't see it. They're very, very good at hiding it, but the anxiety is there. So it was very easy for the department to pretend it wasn't a problem. It clearly is a problem. So we have to deal with it. So how did we do it? And I apologize for rushing. We carried on with CPD. Every week, every department meeting we had CPD on this. We developed theory. We used resources that were already there. I didn't invent new resources. I adapted resources to make sure that people were understanding what was going on. Resources for the intervention were shared with staff to use in lessons. I did a follow-up survey that I'll show you some results for in a moment. We introduced aspects of Rosenshine's principles of instruction to help structure what we should see in a maths lesson. Now, it wasn't, you're just going to do it according to the book. It was, let's use think, pair, share so that the students who have anxiety have an opportunity to rehearse their answer first. So that when we do cold calling, everybody's had a chance to rehearse. We know where things are. Use say it again, but better, to actually encourage students to see that just because they don't get it right the first time, it doesn't mean that they can't get it right. The cold calling linked to think, pair, share. Teachers modeling answers on the board. I hate PowerPoints where you have a beautifully presented solution that the teacher uncovers line by line, because that gives the wrong impression of what maths is like. So we banned it. So teachers now have to model on the board, and along with that comes the risk that you'll mess it up. And that's really important for the students to see, because again, it creates that dialogue where everybody's going to make a mistake, and some of us make mistakes more often than others. The trick is dealing with them when you make them. And then scaffolding is really important as well. Understanding the students in front of you and knowing how to scaffold your tasks so that everyone can access them. So that is the list of expectations that we got from Rosenshine, but adapted to our needs. And that's an expectation that we see in every maths classroom now. And we had an Austin a couple of years ago. I took control of that conversation. And when I went into classes with the inspector, that's what we saw in every class. So that was good. Okay. So what strategies did we use? We used the hand model of the brain. We used the growth zone model, cognitive strategies, so list things that you can do. Try to identify the red zone, key information, annotate diagrams, write all over any diagram. Circle theorem questions at GCSE are horrible. Write on the diagram. Okay, show what you can do and use them to help you, and then work on the structure of your answers. I also gave presentations to parents and to whole year groups on this, and I kind of changed it a little bit. I said the comfort zone is the parent pleasing zone, because that's what parents like to see. You've sat down, you've done 40 questions in the last half hour and you've got them all right. Well done, you. Okay, the red zone I called you're going to lose your phone if you don't do any work zone. Okay, because it makes it real for the parents and the students, because they've all experienced it where they're hitting the wall and they can't see what they're doing, and so the parents think they're not doing anything. Okay, so everybody needs to understand how this works, because if they don't, then nobody's going to make progress. And the growth zone, I've really made it clear to parents, and that message gets reinforced as often as possible. If they're in the growth zone, they might only do 2 or 3 questions in a 40-minute session, but that's fine because they're supposed to struggle. Okay, it's not you, it's the maths. Okay, so it's this consistency and taking risks and giving things a go. So where did it take us? I did a smaller survey afterwards, and the smaller survey showed that there's some improvement, but I remember talking to Sue about it at the time, and it's not a lot. It's tantalizing. It's kind of, okay, it looks like something might be changing here, but it didn't give me much information. With year 10 and year 13, I picked those year groups deliberately because they were the ones that were moving into the high stakes part of their education. The thing that stood out, because I also followed it up with some open-ended, some more kind of which bits do you remember? The thing that stood out was the growth zone model made the biggest impact on their understanding of how they learn. Okay, they could remember seeing it for a start, which is a positive, because none of them could remember the relaxation response, and hardly any of them remember the hand model of the brain, or didn't find it very useful. But it's the fact that over half of them found the growth zone model useful. Admitted to finding it useful, exactly. But then this was another thing, which ones do you use? And it was really upsetting that identifying red zone questions never was the modal answer there. Okay, why not? Why not actually start using that cognitive science and get understanding how they learn and how they approach the questions? Just start writing always. Well, that's a good thing, I think. If you just start writing something and something clicks. So I've got no problem with that one. But skipping the question sometimes, modal answer. Using a relaxation technique, never. So it's the sort of thing that they do on the spot when you go through it with them, but then they never use it again. But the growth zone model stood out as something that's got potential. Staff feedback, hardly anybody actually revisited it when they delivered it once, which is really upsetting. They did feel that a stronger focus on pedagogy was more important than dealing with anxiety and affect, which is upsetting. Felt that students didn't understand the point of the intervention, but surely that's the way they portrayed it. So I was really kind of a bit fed up with that and not particularly happy with it. So there's got to be something else going on. And then we look at the actual exam data. So we've got levels of 9s and 7s with the old A*A category. That's the line. So you can see that's fairly consistent. And then P8. So P8 is progress 8. It's based on their Key Stage 2 data compared to their GCSE outcomes. And anything positive is good. Now, clearly, you can see that we always had a positive P8. Can you tell where the intervention came in? There. Now, obviously, COVID introduced the idea of centre-assessed grades, so that doesn't really count. But the thing that I find really encouraging is that. So you can see once the intervention becomes embedded, our P8 score actually goes up. And last year it was 1.17, which means that students on average did better than a grade or more better than that would have been expected based on their prior attainment. So that, I think, is a really positive thing. But it just reinforces this message that students in my school are very, very good at hiding their anxiety. So the conclusions. There is evidence that practice has changed in the department, which is really, really important and really encouraging. The positive impact on the exam results is indicating that even with the higher selection scores and that P8 score improving as much as it has done, that somehow this is becoming embedded and students feel more able to cope. It's not about there's no anxiety now, but they can cope with their anxiety. They've got strategies to be able to deal with it. I go to various different meetings and we're miles ahead of every other school that I speak to about this. Okay, nobody else is thinking about it in the grammar school kind of sphere in the same way that we are. There is a better understanding of maths anxiety and resilience in the department because it's a conversation that we have regularly. But this, I come back to this idea of it being a transactional relationship where parents give us their students, their children, and expect us to get them a good grade. It's not about education anymore, it's about getting a grade, and that's reinforced by Ofsted, it's reinforced by the appraisal systems that come in. So there are issues there still, and I don't think that we're unique in that. I think that's systemic, and I don't know how it's going to change overnight. In fact, it's not going to change overnight. So where are we then? So what happens when the researcher priorities, my priorities, don't fully align with the head teacher's plans? Well, you end up taking 2 years out of your Ed D so that you can start dealing with what the head teacher wants you to do. Okay. And the reasons for that is that interest is short-lived. Senior leaders are interested at first, but they want quick solutions to things. and you can't have a quick solution to a wicked problem. It doesn't happen. So superficial treatments take over. Other priorities start coming in because there's lots of other teachers in the school who want to make an impact. And so they bring other things in, and the head teacher is very keen to share it out. Rather than focusing on dealing with one issue at a time until it's fixed, we jump around from one thing to another. And so agency and control over the process becomes really, really difficult to manage. I'm looking for sympathy here, okay? So it turns out that completing a research degree in a busy school environment is quite difficult, okay? Especially when you're a head of department. And modelling resilience becomes an essential part of completing the work. And I like to think that I've taken the hits, I'm still here. Look, Holly, I took up running last year. I ran a half marathon in September. I'd never run before. 6 months training, 3 months training, half marathon. So there you go. I took into account what you said even before you said it. But modelling that resilience is really, really important. But you've got to start looking for that high impact and low effort response. It's not going to work. If you want a high impact, you've got to put the time in. And this is one of the conclusions that I think is going to come out of the project. Got to put the time in and be willing to make those changes. And that's where we are. Thank you very much.